Just make sure to send a recording thing to Vicky right after.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so this is a lecture breakdown. This is a course breakdown. Let's kind of go over some parts of the syllabus. Most of the stuff that we're going to be doing today, by the way, is part of homework 1, which we will also talk about. And we're going to be going over some of the major content. Homework 1 is also focusing on understanding, the various high-level aspects of this course, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing today. So if you're here today, that means you've kind of gone over some of the most important parts of the homework. You're going to have some stuff to do still, but hopefully we'll walk through most of it. So that's kind of how today's lecture is going to be structured. All right, so let's just go through the syllabus. We've gone over some of the course information already, so we don't have to look at contact information. But yeah, Slack messages are preferred. So some of you have already messaged me on Slack. Feel free to continue doing that. Facebook Messenger is also a viable option. We have the web dev messenger chat. So feel free to also message on that. Let's see. We're going to be talking about homework a bit and homework deadlines. There is a new homework that has already been released. So if all of you are enrolled on the grade scope, you should be able to see it. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but if you haven't been enrolled in that grade scope, you can add yourselves, and there's a code that we'll talk about later. But yeah, let's talk about this, the basic stack. Yeah, so we want you to attend all the lectures, but there is a YouTube channel that there's a YouTube channel that will host a lot of the content, and there's a lot of content from previous semesters as well. So if you feel like you need a little bit more, or if you haven't seen the lecture yet, you can kind of look at the YouTube. There's playlists for all these different parts, like back end and front end and everything. All the homework assignments will be graded. So they will be graded on completeness, as well as to a certain degree how well you complete the assignment. Again, this club is pretty chill. We're trying to sort of allow you to explore the content as best you can in a way that works best for you. So we highly encourage collaboration in terms of, if you need to work on an assignment together, there's office hours, and there's also just organizing study groups to make things with your friends. Definitely feel free to work together on things and ask as many questions as possible. But again, you want to maximize your own learning experience. So in terms of academic dishonesty and everything like that, just try not to blatantly copy something that somebody else does or something that you found online. Try to keep the work that you do original, because this work is going to be important for for your own personal understanding of these foundational materials, as well as potentially for something that you could use for your portfolio moving forward. In web development, having a portfolio, having a solid amount of projects that you've done is the most important thing, and can be the difference between someone who just knows something conceptually versus someone who has actually played with it with their own hands and is able to work on something, which is definitely a very good thing in what companies are looking for always. So all the homework assignments will be submitted on Gradescope, and here's the code for it. So you can actually self-enroll, and then you'll get access to all the homework assignments, and you'll be able to submit things. And if you have to, for some reason, turn something in late, or if you're unable to turn something in, let Alex know ahead of time. His contact information is on this page, as well as on the Slack, so you can go ahead and message him or email him, whatever you feel is best. But generally, just try to submit everything on time. There's homeworks and there's projects, and we want to try to get to grading them as soon as possible, so we can get to learning new content, so you can kind of be enabled to do bigger and better things. yeah, and again, accommodations and everything like that, just let us know, and then it should be chill. So I think the key part of this is that this course is kind of what you make of it. The more that you put into making this a meaningful and enjoyable experience for you, the better it's going to be. So if you maximize your communication with course staff, then it's going to be better for you moving forward. All right, so now that we've kind of gone over the syllabus, we could talk about assignment 1, but before that, I kind of want to go over, I want to go over the basic stack and kind of our first unit of work. So the basic stack is basically like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and some networking concepts. And this is going to cover the first unit of our course for, I think, both tracks, the front end track and the back end track. Correct me if I'm wrong, Smart. But yeah, so we're going to be learning some of this basic web technology. So the languages of HTML and CSS, although they're technically not languages, but they basically are. So we're going to be learning a little bit about that and about JavaScript. And then we're going to jump into some of the, on the front end track, we're going to be jumping into some of the more complex and beautiful parts of web development in a modern sense. The modern web has evolved to take in a lot of these new frameworks and libraries like React.js, Angular, Vue. We're going to learn about some of these very important design principles that everybody really cares about. We're going to be looking at an interest with several different types of designs. You're going to have the chance to kind of develop some of your own as well. We're going to talk about CSS, Sass, and then some backend things. As well as on the backend track, you'll be also looking at a bunch of very important foundational backend languages and technologies, including Django, Node.js, AWS, and yeah, APIs and databases. So this is all information that is absolutely invaluable. A lot of you might have actually seen some of this stuff before. We'll dive into it a little bit deeper. And all of them, again, they're pretty complex. We're going to be looking at broad overviews, but mostly, I think the most important part is the application of the stuff that we're learning in class. So whether it's like, learning things in React, like React hooks or whatever, sure, we do need to get a very solid foundational conceptual understanding of what those things are and what they look like implemented, but we also need to implement them ourselves. So really get used to getting your hands dirty in web development. That is the most important thing. I mean, for all computer science, but especially for web development, it is a very interactive and hands-on experience. All right, so we've been going kind of fast. Are there any questions about any of the things that we've kind of talked about in terms of the course information or the syllabus or the broad overview of this unit? Okay.
Abhi, just one thing. It might be easy if we go through the Notion pages for this lesson. That also might be easier because that covers show where it is kind of might be helpful and go over a little bit. It's also a little extra information.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so all the lessons are going to be organized right here. We're basically going to be going through the content in the education branch. So looking through these, they can serve as sort of reference material for yourself, understanding or going over some of the stuff that we talked about in class, maybe going over it on your own as well. So let's go into here. So again, that's in the education, it's in the lessons, and then basic stack, and then you can kind of look at all the materials that we're going to be talking about today. Notion's really nice, so we can kind of see all the various parts of today's lecture and the various things that we need to be talking about. Sorry, I keep looking over here because all the content is over here because the computer that I'm actually projecting this on is not really responsive right now. Yeah, all right. Okay, so let's just talk about some of these things. I will actually share my slide right now. Let's go back to this. Great. All right, being kind of responsive. But until this loads, let's go ahead and start talking about what we mean by front end and back end, because those are terms that you're probably like you've heard a million times already in this club, and that's part. And you probably have chosen some sort of track as to what kinds of things you want to learn. Talked a little bit about some of these very important technologies on both the front end side and the back end side. But what exactly is front end and back end, and how do they tie into web technologies? Well, combined, front end and back end are basically the two sides of the coin for web applications and applications in general. The front end is what the user sees. If this ever loads, we will find out if we'll see some of the interesting infographics that kind of outline this. But you can think of this as the two sides of the iceberg. The side that is visible above water, that's the front end, is sort of the part that the user is able to see. That's the part that the design team has kind of worked to carefully craft. So if you go on like Apple's website or something, that's the stuff that you'll see right on the front page and all the various pages that are part of the application. And the back end is everything that happens behind the scenes. So this is entirely useless. I'll just go ahead and share the Notion page instead. All right, so we'll go through some of this content later. What you'll be learning. Cool, this is the house. Yeah, so in terms of front end, you basically need all the basic tools of front end are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Along with, if you understand those three technologies, you will be entirely enabled to create pretty much anything you want. As you'll see, some of the more advanced things that we'll learn will involve actually a lot of JavaScript, a lot of HTML, and a lot of CSS, even though they might seem at first glance to be entirely independent. For example, React is something that seems quite unfamiliar for people if they don't have a solid understanding of JavaScript. Because at its very core, the stuff that JavaScript does is integral to all of these various different types of libraries. So the basic stack will be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because that is the core content that everything else rides off of, as you will very soon see. So yeah, so that's basically what we're going to be working on for this first unit. HTML is the very basic, like, core aspects of the web page. Imagine taking something like Craigslist, you know, even Craigslist has a little styling, but something that is like super plain, has no sort of design on it, just has the various functional aspects of your website onto a page that somebody sees. For example, it might have something like a really simple button, or a really simple list, a link, an image. So this is where all these tags come into play. Things like the A tag, things like the P tag. And this is also where various very important things like search engine optimization come into play. where we need to understand how to make websites accessible and responsive. So in order to work with that responsivity, and also in terms of creating a beautiful design that people actually like to see, something that looks engaging to the user. That's where CSS comes in. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Oh, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So basically, we're going to take that hypertext markup language and everything that we've sort of displayed, and we're going to make it look beautiful with CSS. These style sheets sort of define the various parameters of the website, the various types of different classes and everything that we're going to be using in order to kind of make everything not only look good, but also understandable for different people. So this is something very important that we're going to realize, is how to organize our components, how to organize our code very well in terms of our CSS in order to make it readable for other developers as well as for users. All right, let's. Okay, so this is still not loading. Let me just go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, there we go. Can you see this now? Great, awesome. All right, so this is kind of an overview of what we just talked about. So the front end is stuff like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, React, Vue, Angular, making asynchronous calls to, and making API calls to databases, things that we can sort of all do from the front end, from the client side, and make requests and interactions with the server. But from the back end, we're not actually sort of, we're not like trying to manipulate any of the data or clean up the data, sort of organize things from various different sources. All of the stuff, organization and the nitty gritty backend stuff, you know, the underside of this happens sort of behind the scenes. And that's something that the user doesn't have to worry about at all. And something that's very important in all of this, sort of everything working together and making everything performant so that users are actually able to access and load pages without having to wait a lot of time. And we'll talk a little bit about performant web pages, responsive web pages, optimized web pages as well moving forward. But does that sort of make sense in terms of front end versus back end and the essential dichotomy that unites the two? Do you have any questions about that? Any broad questions that we could sort of answer now? Okay, great, awesome. But yeah, here's something that goes a little bit deeper into that. The front end is the point of contact. It is the first thing that the client sees, the first thing the user sees. The back end is the stuff that happens behind the scenes. It's the database. It's the authentication protocol. It is, you know, maybe some of the machine learning that happens behind the scenes. And this is sort of the flow of who accesses what and who sees what. So this is something that's kind of integral to web development. This image right here. Okay, we can jump into the homework in a minute, but before that, let's sort of take a minute to introduce you to some of these different types of languages. All right. Okay, so yeah, let's just take like a short, like 2-minute pause because I want to ask people if they have any questions or anything that they'd like to ask about right now. Go ahead and drop it in the chat if you have any questions.
I have a question. Like, what would be the best way to learn? Should we be taking notes, like pen and paper, or just like watching you?
So in a minute, So for now, we've kind of gone over a lot of very broad things, and I'm repeating myself a bunch of times because this is kind of very foundational and important stuff that we kind of need to get a mental model of before we start going into it. In the future, there will be like a lot more content. So for example, next lecture, there will be like a lot of stuff like different types of tags and things like that. So if you want to take notes at that point, you definitely can. Taking notes is like 100% optional. What matters is that like you are sort of taking the stuff that we're doing in lecture and actually maybe doing it. So later on in lecture, we're going to be going over some of the content that's part of homework 1. And that might actually happen like just in a couple minutes. So at that point, you can follow along. We're going to be learning about Git, learning about GitHub Pages, some aspects of terminal. So at that point, you guys can follow along. Does that sound good?
Yeah, thank you.
I also just want to add one more thing. So if you go to the lecture notes in Notion under lessons and basic stack front or whatever, those will basically serve as more of a reading that'll supplement these lectures. And so everything should be in the reading. 90% of the content you're going to need is in the reading. The reading is optional, but I'd highly recommend it just because it's very comprehensive and everything you need to know is in there. And we've worked very hard on this, so that's kind of nice. But yeah, if you want to take notes, go for it. But like everything you need is in the readings, and also just doing the assignments, I feel like is enough. Doing the assignments, doing the readings, some of the lectures, and then participating in the projects when we get to those, I feel are enough. But of course, if notes help you, go for it. Everyone learns differently, and if notes are better for you than readings, go for it. But really, assignments are where you're going to learn 90% of the stuff.
Very cool, thank you.
Absolutely. And from the on the point of like assignments, homework 1 is assigned. Alex, I think, put it up like a little bit earlier today. And it will be due on February 22nd at 8 p.m. So that's next Monday. Make sure that you look at the assignment, see what it's asking. We're actually going to kind of go over it today. Let me see. Yeah, homework 0. Okay, we'll go over it today. But yeah, just keep that in the back of your mind that we want to submit homework by February 22nd at 8 p.m. And you should actually do that like pretty much after this lecture or during this lecture if you can. It's sort of all like the necessary boilerplate that you need to get started. Yeah, I'd say like 90% of the material is in these notes. They're very nicely organized. We're going to be linking like a couple of resources as well. So you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. And we're also going to be talking about various other things, maybe like pursuing like a little bit of implementation in the future, in future lectures. So that's where, the other 10% comes in. It's some of the nuances as we're going through lectures. So here are some of the technologies that we're going to be using. I, as well as like a lot of people that use Mac, but to code and stuff like that. So I'm going to be working with the Mac ecosystem for this lecture. But all of these things that we're going to be talking about have Windows equivalents. So you can definitely just figure that out. Like, for example, I have Terminal running up right now. You can open up whatever you prefer. So yeah, so obviously, since we're working with web technologies, we're working with the browser. I specifically use Google Chrome, but a lot of other people like to use things like Firefox, Safari, Edge. We want to make sure that we are very familiar with the browser that we're using, and also that we're familiar with and we're open to using other browsers as well. Because what we'll find is that we want our web applications and our websites to run on everything: your phone, your Game Boy Advanced, your like Firefox. We just want it to run on absolutely everything and be super responsive. So, I mean, you could be working with one thing like Firefox or something like that in terms of like your development and at first, but you need to be testing on all of these different tools. So for now, sort of download the dev tools, which are the developer tools, on the sort of platform of your choosing. I use Chrome, so I really like Chrome dev tools. I haven't actually tried Firefox dev tools too much, so maybe I'll try it out. But the dev tools are basically like they're like an all-in-one, like beautiful toolkit that you will be using nonstop. If you want to change something about like a really small like CSS thing, or if you want to add like a small HTML tag and see how it looks, or even if you want to work on debugging, if you have like something that you want to debug, like a button that you want to debug or something like that, you'll find out that there's an innumerable amount of tools just all packaged into the developer tools that will allow you to accomplish all of those things. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about all of them in the future. And our teachers and lecturers will be able to help you with those things in office hours as well. The editor that we're going to be working with doesn't really matter. So that's exactly like, that's pretty much it. Like everybody always asks, like, what editor do I use? Should I use Sublime? Should I use Atom? Should I use VS Code? None of those things actually matter a whole lot, but Visual Studio Code is easily the best out of all of them. There's just so many features and so many extensions that are possible with Visual Studio Code. And in my experience, it just looks like a lot better. And it works a lot faster. It takes up the least amount of memory. So I would say like Visual Studio Code is probably the best tool that you would use for this. But again, you can use anything if you're more comfortable with Sublime or even like Vim or whatever it is. Just make sure that you're comfortable with it and get comfortable with that technology. So yeah, so there's Sublime Text and Atom. I also did this. Yeah, so yeah, Sublime Text, like you don't actually need to pay, but they occasionally do ask you to pay like some money in order to access like the features or whatever, but everything's free anyway. Okay. Yeah, Vim and Emacs are other potential options if you want to like know like command line text editors, but they are like quite difficult to learn like from the get-go, and I don't think it's particularly useful to get stuck in intricacies like right when you're starting off, but you could always learn how to use them like later on. So we're going to start working with the terminal now. And for the purposes of this, let's just sort of like walk through some of the various things that we're going to be looking at in the notes. This is not like typically how your terminal will look if you sort of haven't installed anything else in it on your own. On a Mac, I think Macs do use ZSH by default, but depending on what operating system you're using and depending on the extensions that you've downloaded for your terminal, it could look different. I use like a whole lot of like different things, but this is how ZSH looks, and ZSH, SSH, all these like, not SSH, but
Abhi, I don't think we can
Bash
see your
and everything.
terminal.
Oh, okay, thank you. That is good. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Great. Okay, yeah, this is not how it's going to look for everybody. But you can sort of customize things at will in terminal, but all the things that I'm going to be talking about today are things that you can do as well at home, so feel free to follow along. We'll use Bash. So Bash is sort of what the Mac ecosystem uses. I think Windows might use something slightly different, so the commands will also be slightly different. You might have to look up the Windows equivalents if that's the case.
Also, one note, Bash, like Mac actually switched to ZSH recently, so these notes were written before then. But like for basic commands, it really doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's quite like backwards compatible. Like ZSH and SSH or Bash are quite similar. All right, let's jump into the homework and see what it looks like. All right, sweet. So part 0 of the homework is actually to read the syllabus again. We have gone over a lot of the syllabus today, but I just read it over again for your own benefit. Yeah, so a really important thing for this class is understanding how to read documentation. If I don't think that like a majority of like web developers actually remember like all of the HTML's tags, for instance, like people could probably only name like a couple dozen. But what the most important thing is to be able to search for those resources on your own. So highly encourage you to go through this guide and just read along and try to understand what's happening. And constantly just do not be afraid to look things up on Stack Overflow. Or write your own Stack Overflow question, doesn't matter. But chances are that if you have a problem that's very clearly stated and you understand it, and it's sort of minimized down to the smallest part of the problem, you should be able to find the answer. Someone must have asked something very similar online. And so that's a very vital skill, understanding how to ask and read questions on Stack Overflow. So look at those guides as well. Okay, so a lot of you, if you have taken 61B or even 61A, you're probably very familiar with Git and GitHub, but I'll go through it anyway. Just like a really basic overview. Basically, like when you install Git for the first time, if you don't have it installed, you'll know it by typing git version, and then if you don't have Git installed, it'll sort of like tell you that you don't have Git installed. And then at that point, you can download it off of the Git website. I think I've linked it in the resources that I'll send to you for the presentation. But yeah, Git is basically, at a very high level, it's basically just a version control software that allows you to store different versions of the code that you're working on. So you can think of it kind of like Google Docs for coders, but like a lot better than that. And how it works is sort of like a little too high level. But basically, you need to know that you can store things in various versions of the same file on your own machine without like creating like a whole lot of clutter. And also, you can upload, I guess, your the work that you're doing online to things like GitHub, which are distributed like version control systems that allow you to access the repositories that you've made on your own local machine, as well as be able to work with other developers anywhere and be able to work on things synchronously without causing like huge problems in your code. So that is Git and GitHub, very high level. And the way that you start like, okay. So at its core terminal, you can sort of use these various commands like pwd, which basically gives you the current repository that you're on. That's that kind of the current directory that you're on. So I'm in my web dev directory of the Berkeley and Spring 21 folders. And this will allow you to sort of, so no matter what directory that you're on, so for example, I'm at my home directory now, I can access that directory by copying this and then going to it by typing cd and then entering that. And now I'm on that same directory as over there. CD means change directories and allows you to go to that directory. ls allows you to see all of the subdirectories and the files that are within the directory that you're working in. So ls kind of reveals everything, but it doesn't go anywhere. ls stands for list, yeah. And then man is the manual. So in case you don't know what ls is, or if you forget what something is, man will allow you to see everything at once. So man ls. Okay, let's forget about that because Xcode is acting up for me. All right. Yeah, and then mkdir is basically like create new folder. So you can create, let's see, a new folder. There we go. We can cd into that new folder, which means we actually go into it. It's the equivalent of like double clicking from your Finder. And then this command touch index.html actually creates the file. And so this is actually like a really small like tutorial of VI, but I'm not going to go through it right now because it's a little intricate. But basically, like if you ever find yourself stuck inside a VI file, just press command like :Q and then hit enter, and that's how you leave it. But also, if you want to kind of look at these various some of like the really easy, the simplest VI commands, you can look at this part of the notes and it'll sort of explain it. Enough to make you dangerous, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, these skills, understanding how ZSH or Bash or any of these things work are absolutely vital. You're going to be working in the command line a whole lot, even if you like use a lot of other tools like sort of replacements to command line tools like GitHub Desktop instead of the Git command line interface. You're still going to be using it inevitably as a programmer. So might as well get very familiar with how it works. And the way to get familiar with it is kind of to look over various YouTube videos, or there's this course on front-end master which will actually give you like it won't just give you like an understanding of terminal, it'll give you an understanding of like full stack development. And it's something that I've started looking at recently. Samarth really recommends it. So you guys should check out this course. And also there's this 101 sort of crash course guide on terminal and command line that you could also take a look at. Are there any questions so far on any of this material? I'm going kind of slowly. Maybe I'll start picking it up now. So let me know if you have any questions about any of this stuff that we've gone over. Sweet. Okay. You guys have probably already seen a lot of this before. But yeah, so let's talk about Git now. So the file that we just created is called index.html. We can see it if we look inside this index.html. And let's just go ahead and just modify this by adding in this content right here. All right, and so the way I did that is by using like another text editor called Nano, which is like a much easier version of Vim. So you could just type in like nano index.html and then copy paste this into it, and that'll create a file that contains that content in it. And this is HTML, so this is like the core like language that started it all, I guess. And as you can see, it's sort of surrounded by tags, HTML tag, head tag, title, and we'll get to see some of this stuff in action, but and we'll also understand how a lot of this works. Let's create
just one last note. Don't worry if this HTML just seems like chicken scratch right now. The next lesson is about HTML. Just interpret this as a block of code if you don't know what this means.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this HTML file could have included anything in it. Actually, we could have put anything in this folder. It doesn't really matter what it is, like a bunch of images or CSVs or whatever. Well, all we're going to do here is we're going to try to create a Git repository and see how that works. So let's create a Git repository by typing git init, git initialize, and it creates an empty repository in this folder. And then we can sort of ls-a, I think. Yeah. And then we sort of see all the folders. And one of the folders that we've created is a hidden folder called .git, which stores all of the metadata and all the information for the different versions of our files. And you'll understand what that means in a minute. But what we need to do in order to sort of save this file for the first time is to stage it by saying git add. And the way to add an individual file is to say git add index.html, but the way to add like every single file that has been changed is git add dot, which sort of adds everything, or git add, I think, dash all. And that adds in all the files, which might come in handy a little bit later. So if you type in git status now, you'll see that changes to be committed has new file index.html in it. And we can sort of work with this file and commit it for the first time. So when we commit it, that's when we're actually saving the file. Instead of like just having like a version of it on our computers, we're having a whole commit that stores the entire previous version of a file, or the previous version of a directory if you decide to commit everything. So if we type in git commit my first commit, we have created our first commit. So now we type git status, and there's nothing to commit. There's no like further information that we haven't already saved. We can create that new information in a minute. So yeah, and if you've taken like 61A and 61B, this is probably like rehashing old content quite a bit, but just wanted to go over it. And so if you see git log, you'll see this first commit right here, my first commit. And then when you create another commit, you can see that next commit in that commit log as well. So all of these things are the very basic ideas of Git, but there's an infinite amount of other things, not infinite, a whole lot of other things that you can do with Git that are all essential. So all of these different things are going to be stuff that if you haven't already used them, you're going to be using them for development purposes. I'd say like the most important ones to learn are git pull, git clone, merge, checkout, and branch, which will kind of help you work with other developers and understand how to use code from online, open source code or code that you're working on from a GitHub repo. So speaking of GitHub repos, this is sort of a very important part of Git. It allows you to store the stuff that you're doing online. So right now, this Git repo isn't really like, no one else can see it. No one else can work with it. No one else can create their own commits. It's all on your local device. And the only way to sort of work with other people is to be able to establish remotes. So let's see if this one has any remotes. In this case, we don't have any remotes in this repository. So we can sort of, let's see. Yeah, we can sort of like just, we have to create our own repository. We have to create our own remote repository. Okay, yeah. But I've already created like a remote repository here, so I'll just go ahead and all right, so in this case, there actually is a remote. And the way that we add a remote to ours, which means that like a place to save our Git repository to, like online somewhere, is to say git remote add origin and then put in your project URL. If you go on GitHub, you'll see that your project URL, you can create it by creating a new repository and then copying the link at the top of the screen. So let's see if we can kind of see that here. All right. Yeah, so here for this demo thing, the link for it is right here. So we just have to type in like git remote add origin. Origin is like basically the home part, the sort of what you'll be referencing later on when it comes to working and merging your code and everything like that. And then you add your project URL there. And so the remote that you're going to be accessing and that you're going to be working with, again, is called origin. And it's just like a place for you to sort of put all of your code, and a place, and that's the place where it starts for you. Yeah, anyway, we don't have to talk like a little bit too in depth about that, but again, you can read all about it here. and look at some of the resources that we're going to link in order to understand that information. Yeah, and so this is the push command. We've already sort of done a little bit of that here. Let me just see if this is okay. Right now there's nothing really to add, but I can just add in like another file here. So let's see. Okay. So let's just do something like that. It's kind of dumb, but basically I'm just trying to add something else to the file. And then I'm going to make another commit. So and then git push, and then you can specify your upstream. Let's see. Yeah, it's going to be the master repository. So what you are going to specify as your target branch is the branch that you would like to push your changes to. So in this case, I want to push right to the master branch. I want to add index2.html to the master branch. Right now there's only index, right? We want to add our newest commit to the master branch. And the way we do that is to say git push, and then you can specify your master, your origin is your user if you want, and then you can go ahead and type in your destination. And that'll create that. All right, so now if you sort of refresh the page here, you can see like the new content. Right now it has nothing in it, but the index has something in it. This is the information that you'll fork later from the GitHub. I think it's a little bit earlier. Let me see. Yeah, it's right here. Okay, so we want to clone this GitHub repo. And the way you can clone it, you can do some of this research on your own, but there's this command called Git Clone, where you can just go here and then Git Clone this URL onto your computer, and then you can work from that directory and see everything that's happening there. You can also just fork the directory directly, but I'm going to leave that up to you as sort of part of the assignment. I just forked the repository, and that way everything seems to line up here. Let me just see. I created this repository somewhat recently, so maybe this doesn't work yet, but okay, great. So yeah, so this is GitHub Pages, and this is the last part of the assignment. GitHub Pages is just a way for you to deploy your website and actually see it on the web, where anybody can access it through this link. And basically, when you create a GitHub repository, you can also choose to enable this functionality that where GitHub actually gives you a host to deploy the website that you just created on. And this means that you need various things like an index file, index.html file, and stuff like that. But for now, you can sort of just clone this and see how it turns out. Right, so open a new GitHub repo, push the code as we talked about, go to settings, and then find the GitHub Pages session. It won't look like this for you. It'll probably look like this or something like that. But you just need to go ahead and change that to branch master and root so that GitHub Pages knows where to look to find all the necessary files to create the website. And then once you save, it'll go ahead and publish your site at this URL that anyone can access, like your friend from the other side of the world could access this, and it will work. So this is a really simple website that WDB created just for this lecture and for purposes of demonstration. Basically, it's like just like a simple outline of what you might see on like an Apple homepage or something. That kind of looks a lot like the design style that Apple chooses often. I think these links don't really do anything. Macintosh was sold out. So this is, yeah, so this is like some really basic stuff, like basic HTML and CSS that allowed us to create this page. But it does take a minute for the changes to render, so don't be confused if it's not like loading right away or anything like that. Once you actually publish your site, give it a couple minutes and then it should load. So yeah, so that's like we've gone through the entire homework, I think, almost the entire homework. There's also the installation of some like various important technologies like Node.js, Homebrew, which you should definitely just download and also install Python, but a lot of you probably have it already. And also install Django. All of these things are, you know, necessities for this course, and in general for web development. So AWS as well, another very important backend technology that I think we're all going to be using, even everybody from the front end side. And once you're done with all of this, you can just submit your URL to the homework assignment. All right, sweet. There are some other things that I just like to talk about real quick. All right, these slides just aren't loading. It is what it is. So if you want to look at and understand Git and some of the stuff that we talked about like really in depth, there's a 3-hour course on front-end masters that we mentioned a little bit. We haven't mentioned this one actually, but it's an in-depth Git course. So highly encourage you to look at that. I think front-end masters is free for the first 6 months that you sign up for it. So if you want to look at that, that's cool. There's also a crash course that you can find on Free Code Camp that is a really nice sort of breakdown of everything that you need to do in terms of Git without making it like too complicated. And here is the Web Dev at Berkeley sort of YouTube channel. So just feel free to look at the videos or whatever you need to do. We might upload this later on onto the YouTube channel, but I'm not sure. Yeah, let's see if this is loaded. Nope, it hasn't. Awesome. All right, cool. And then look at any of these resources if you have any questions. But let's circle back to this now. So we've gone through the entire homework assignment. We've looked at the course information. We've looked at the syllabus. And we've kind of just done a broad sweep over what we're going to be learning this unit. This was more of like a logistics and technology type of lesson, but not like none of the future lessons will be like this. So yeah, just like in the future, like be prepared to come in and really like put your entire like try to understand everything if you're not already familiar with those technologies and everything like that. All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and pause for now. It's like 5:20, so we can open up the floor to questions or anything that you have about the course or about this lesson or anything that you have that you'd like to ask me or any of the other educators that are here. Does anybody have any questions at all? It'd be great if you guys could just like turn your cameras on since we're like at the end of the lesson anyway. We could sort of just make this a conversation. Awesome. All right. Someone could just unmute and just tell us, what do you hope to get out of this course as a whole? Just feel free to unmute and just shout it out.
I guess one thing I want to get out of this course is like, I want to step out of my limits with what I can do right now. So like, I want to be able to make a website and not be limited by like not knowing enough. I just want to be able to do what I vision rather than like being behind and like having to learn where to like build a website.
So are you like familiar with like a different aspect of CS, or are you just trying to get introduced to like CS from like a web development
I mean,
standpoint?
I'm just trying to like expose myself to everything, and I think web development's a good start. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Anybody else?
I think I want to like gain the skills to feel like empowered to like do my own projects or like work on projects with other people. And right now I feel like kind of like I don't have those skills. So hopefully that's something I can build upon.
Awesome. Yeah. Is there any particular type of project that you have, or if you have any of those like exciting like ideas or vision or anything like that, you will have like opportunities to work on those types of projects like in the future in this course. There's some pretty open-ended ideas out there, and like you can ask any of the educators or anything like that for help if you want like advice or anything regarding those things. Okay, what is the difference between a console and a terminal? Okay, so yeah, so like what we're gonna be working on, or what I have been sort of working with, is the terminal. On Mac, it's called a terminal, but I think it's called like a command prompt or something on Windows, I think. Is that right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, but like a console is basically like any like output device that you could sort of work with. Like a Python has like IDE could have its own sort of console. But yeah, I mean, it has like, you could think of that as any sort of like output screen that has that type of networking device associated with it. But the terminal, like what we usually colloquially refer to as a console, is like what we see when we open up terminal. Terminal is like part of the console, if that makes sense.
Is terminal like an interpreter kind of thing?
Terminal is like a file system organizer, as well as kind of an operating system like program. You could think of it as like just another program on the operating system.
Oh, okay. And then like the shell would be actually what interprets the commands.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Cool. Any other questions about anything that we learned or about the course?
I guess one thing is like later in the semester, we're gonna have to like split between front and back end. Would you say that even if we go down one path, we'll be equipped enough to like at least start on the other side? Like if I, for example, do front end, will I be able to construct a decent enough back end without doing that track?
Yeah, so something that I find really cool about the way that this course is structured is that we're going to be talking about the various like fundamentals of either side. So like, I guess like in depth, they're quite disparate. Like understanding how like Django and like the intricacies of Django versus the intricacies of React are quite different. So we can't really like pile them together into the same course. But at the end of the front end course, for example, there's a backend primer that gives you like a lot of the like basic skills that you need to become like dangerous in that technology. And since it's a primer, it also leads right into the backend material. And so like by the end of it, you should be able to publish like a full functional like working application, because the backend side also has its own front end primer at the end of it. And so like, I guess our goal is to create like, to give you like all the tools necessary in order for you to create your own thing, and not like just restrict you to like one side of the field so that you can't actually like have everything that you need to succeed. So it will actually give you all that thing. Another very important point is that all of these lectures are like attendable by either side. So if you're on the front end track, you could still go to the back end lectures, even like encourage going to it. You could go to like any of the WDV meetings, like no matter what like you're studying or what you're looking for. When do we choose a track? Great question. Is Samart still here? I don't know if he is, but that is a good question to ask him.
Well, yeah, I can briefly talk about this. So, yeah, essentially at the end of our basic track, you will be given like a Google form, and then you can like fill out your preferences. So yeah, So it should be around, if you look at the syllabus, it should take around 1, 2, 3, 8 lectures, which is like around 4 weeks till you can choose between front and back end.
Yeah. So I think that's after the basic stack unit, right, Alex? Okay, I think it is. Yeah. So we're going to be learning about like all this basic stack stuff. And I think after that, you can go ahead and choose like whichever track you want to do, which will give you like a really nice understanding of where you want to go, you know? And again, you can go to any lecture you want. So that's kind of cool. I think you might also be able to submit assignments for either track, but I'm not sure about that. Okay, cool. Anything else? Awesome. Yeah, I think this was a pretty great meeting. We talked about all the important logistics. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Super excited to see all of you and kind of get to meet all of you as well. I hope you come to the office hours and also hope you come to next Monday's lecture. We didn't get to have a lecture this Monday, but next Monday we will have a great lecture. I think it's taught by Alex, I think. But yeah, so I hope to see you guys there as well. We're going to be diving right into some of the technologies. Cool. We'll probably just end the meeting here. It's pretty close to 5:30. I'll stick around for like a couple minutes afterward in case you guys have any questions or anything like that. You can stick around and talk to me. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So like in terms of lectures, I know that they're like recorded. I think on like for the Monday lectures, I have a discussion that kind of not a discussion, sorry, another commitment that runs like for the first half of the lecture. So is it possible for me to like, you know, attend every second one, or you know, maybe just catch up on those ones? Or
Yeah, for sure. So your name's Anirudh. Okay, got it. I'll just tell the rest of the education team that you probably won't be able to attend most Mondays, I'm guessing, and then you can watch the recordings afterwards and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then attend Wednesday lecture as well. That's totally cool. Just make sure that you like watch it so you don't fall behind.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Take care. Hi, Shani, is that how to pronounce your name?
Hi, sorry. My dad called me to get dinner, so I like left for a second to grab pizza.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm good to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.